The Galactic Dominion had records of every species it had ever conquered. It had files on the Keth, a four-armed warrior race that had taken 11 years to break. It had entries for the Solhari, a psychic collective that had resisted for 6 years before the Dominion burned their home star. It had long, detailed folders on the Vren, the Ashkai, the Murok, and 24 others who had all tried to fight back and all failed in the end. It did not have a file on humanity. That was the first sign something was wrong. Admiral Zorak Veln sat in his command chair aboard the dreadnought Eternal Authority and stared at the report his intelligence officer had just handed him. The paper, well, the data slate, but Veln still thought of reports as paper in the old way, said almost nothing useful. A small blue planet, third from a yellow star, in a quiet arm of the galaxy. The planet had a thin atmosphere and a lot of water. It was home to a species of soft-bodied bipeds with no natural weapons, no energy shields, no hive mind, no psychic ability, and a lifespan of less than 100 of their own years. The intelligence file was exactly 4 lines long. "Is this everything?" Veln asked. His intelligence officer, a nervous creature named Sivek, clasped 3 of its 6 hands together. "That is everything the Dominion has recorded, Admiral. The species was flagged as pre-contact. They have not yet reached other star systems in meaningful numbers. A few probes, 1 small station orbiting their moon. Nothing threatening." Veln looked at the file again. 4 lines. He had seen more data on uninhabited rock worlds. "And the planet is in the path of our expansion route?" "Yes, Admiral. Sector 7 of the new expansion push. Their star system sits directly along our preferred transit lane toward the Calyx Nebula resource fields." Veln set the data slate down. This was not even a real military problem. This was an administrative one. You didn't send a war fleet to deal with pre-contact species. You sent a contact ship, gave them the standard submission documents, gave them 30 of their days to agree, and then came back with a small enforcement fleet if they said no. It was a process the Dominion had done hundreds of times. "Send a contact vessel," Veln said. "Standard protocol. Offer them a place in the Dominion as a client species. We will return in 30 of their days." Sivek bowed and left. Veln turned back to his command screens and forgot about the little blue planet almost immediately. He would not forget about it for long. The contact vessel returned in 11 of the planet's days, not 30. That was the second sign something was wrong. Veln was in the middle of a strategy briefing when the communication request came in. He almost ignored it, but his first officer flagged it as urgent. Veln excused himself from the briefing and took the call in his private chamber. The face on the screen belonged to Ambassador Preth, a veteran of 40 contact missions. Preth had delivered the Dominion's terms to warrior races, to hive minds, to species that communicated in pure mathematics. Preth did not rattle easily. Preth looked rattled. "Admiral," the ambassador said, "I need to report a complication." "What kind of complication?" "The humans, that is what they call themselves, Admiral. They did not respond to our submission offer the way other species do." Veln waited. "Most species," Preth continued, "either agree immediately, or they ask for time to deliberate, or they posture and threaten before eventually agreeing. The humans did none of these things." "What did they do?" Preth looked off screen for a moment, as if gathering thoughts. "They laughed, Admiral." A long silence filled the chamber. "They laughed," Veln repeated. "Their leader. They have many leaders, actually, which is itself unusual. One of them, a representative of something called the United Earth Council, read our submission document. Then she looked up at me and she laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a genuine one, like we had said something funny. And then she said, 'Tell your admiral that we appreciate the invitation, but we're going to have to decline.' And then she handed the document back to me and offered me something called tea. I did not drink it. I left." Veln stared at the screen. In 40 years of contact missions, no species had ever simply declined. Refused violently, yes. Wept and begged, yes. Sent long counter-proposals, yes. But a flat, polite no, followed by an offer of a beverage? "Did they understand the document?" Veln asked. Did they understand what refusal means? I made it very clear, Admiral. I told them refusal meant military action within 30 days. And? Preth hesitated. She nodded, and then she said, and I am quoting directly, "We know, we've been getting ready." That night, Veln reviewed the intelligence file on humanity again. It was still 4 lines long. He added a 5th line himself, caution advised. Unknown behavioral patterns. He nearly dismissed the feeling in his gut as nothing. Nearly. Instead, he ordered a full scan of the human star system. The results came back 2 days later, and Veln read them 3 times, certain his sensors were wrong. They were not wrong. In the 11 days since the contact vessel had arrived, the humans had done something extraordinary. They had moved. Not evacuated. Moved with purpose. Their small orbital station above the moon had been expanded, rapidly and messily, into something that looked almost like a defensive platform. Dozens of vessels had been pulled out of what the Dominion scanners cataloged as storage. Old ships, worn ships, ships that clearly had not left their docks in years. They were being repaired and armed at a pace that should not have been possible for a pre-contact species. And the humans were talking, constantly, loudly. Their communications frequencies were flooded with transmissions between their planet and something the scanners were picking up farther out in the system. Ships, it seemed, that had been traveling for some time and were now being called back home. "They have ships in deep space?" Veln asked his science officer. "Small ones, Admiral. Exploratory. Some cargo haulers. It appears they have been expanding quietly through their outer system. We simply did not look far enough." Veln felt something cold settle in his chest. The original intelligence file had said humanity was pre-contact, limited to their home system, not a threat. But that file was based on a single long-range sensor pass done by a survey drone 6 years ago. Nobody had looked closely since. Nobody had thought it worth the effort. He was beginning to think someone should have looked more closely. He ordered a second survey, deeper this time, broader. The results took 4 days, and they were, to put it plainly, confusing. Humanity had not built an empire. They had not built a fleet. What they had built was something harder to categorize. There were human outposts on the moons of their gas giant neighbors. Small, industrial, clearly built for mining and resource extraction. There were relay stations extending in a rough web through the outer reaches of their system. There was a second planet, a dry red world with a surface dotted by the heat signatures of underground facilities. None of it was military. All of it was infrastructure. And all of it could, in a very short time, become military. "They've been building a backbone," Velen's tactical officer said, studying the survey results. "Not a military force. A foundation, supply lines, resources, industrial capacity, if they move to war footing." "How long?" Veln asked. "To what level, Admiral?" "To a level that concerns me." His tactical officer was quiet for a moment that lasted too long. "They may already be there, Admiral. In the 11 days since contact, they have moved faster than I would have predicted was possible. If they have been quietly building this infrastructure for the past 6 years since our survey." "How long?" Veln asked again. "I don't know, Admiral. That is what concerns me." Veln called a command meeting that evening. He laid out everything they knew, which was still not much, and everything they suspected, which was more worrying. His officers debated for 3 hours. The consensus was that humanity was not a real threat. They were a primitive species having a brave moment. The Dominion had seen this before. The Vren had done something similar, built up their defenses quickly when the contact ship arrived, puffed themselves up, tried to look dangerous. It had not saved them. Humanity would not be saved either. But several of his officers quietly agreed with Veln that the file, 4 lines, a 6th line now, was embarrassingly thin. They were going in with almost no information. That was sloppy. The Dominion was never sloppy. "We go in 30 days, Veln said at the end of the meeting. "Standard enforcement fleet, 12 warships. That is more than enough." Everyone agreed. 12 ships had never failed before. Down on the blue planet, in a large building in a city called Geneva, the United Earth Council's Defense Committee was in its 14th consecutive hour of emergency session. Empty cups and food containers covered the long table. The wall screens showed star maps and fleet positions and logistics chains, and 100 other things that required attention all at once. The Council's senior military advisor, a gray-haired woman named General Mara Chen, stood at the head of the table and spoke in a calm voice that had not wavered in 14 hours. "We have one advantage," she said. "They do not know what we have. They saw our public face, the station, the registered ships, the things we reported to each other, and never hid, because we never thought we'd need to hide them." She paused. "They did not see the rest." The rest was the word the Defense Committee used for a great many things that humanity had been doing quietly for the past several decades. Not secretly. There had been no reason to keep it secret from each other, but quietly, practically, in the way that humans built things when they thought about the future seriously. The deep mining operations in the asteroid belt, which also happened to produce the raw materials for ship armor at remarkable scale. The university research programs that had, quite by accident, produced 3 working prototypes of a drive system that the Dominion didn't seem to have. The private defense contractors who had been selling weapons systems to various Earth governments for a century and had recently, very recently, in response to certain astronomical observations that had made some astronomers nervous, agreed to pool their patents for national emergency use. And the ships, not the registered cargo haulers and survey vessels that the Dominion's drone had catalogued 6 years ago. The other ships, the ones that existed because certain people in certain governments had read certain reports and decided, quietly and practically, to build some things just in case. "How many?" one of the council members asked. General Chen looked at her screen. "Enough," she said. She did not say how many. The number was not the point. The point was that humanity had been looking at the stars for a very long time, and some of them had been thinking hard about what might be looking back. The 30 days passed. Admiral Velln's fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the human star system right on schedule. 12 warships in a standard enforcement formation, enough firepower to crack a moon, enough to end any resistance a pre-contact species could mount. His sensors lit up immediately. "Admiral," his sensor officer said, voice carefully controlled, "I am reading many contacts." "How many?" A pause. "I am still counting, Admiral." Velln leaned forward in his command chair. On the main screen, the human star system was resolving into detail, and everywhere he looked, there were ships. Not a few ships. Not the brave, desperate cluster of old vessels he had expected from a pre-contact species making a last stand. Ships everywhere, around the planet, around the moon, in the asteroid belt, along the transit routes between worlds. Big ships and small ships. Ships in formation, and ships still moving into position. Ships that looked old, and ships that looked like they had been built in the past 30 days. "Admiral," his tactical officer said slowly, "I do not recognize these weapon configurations. Several of these vessels are equipped with systems we have no record of." Velln stared at the screen. The intelligence file had been 4 lines long. Down on the planet, in the Geneva building, General Chen watched the Dominion fleet appear on her screens. She counted 12 ships. She had expected 12 to 20. She looked at the fleet disposition report in her hand, then at the number of contacts her sensors were tracking on the Dominion side. 12 ships. She almost felt sorry for them. Almost. She picked up the communications headset and opened a channel. "This is General Mara Chen of the United Earth Defense Force, speaking on behalf of the United Earth Council. Admiral, I believe you have arrived to enforce submission terms we have already declined. I want to be very clear with you before anything happens. What you see on your sensors is real. This is not a bluff. We would strongly prefer that you reconsider and leave. If you do not, we will defend ourselves, and we will not stop until the threat is gone." She waited. 12 light seconds away, in the command chair of the Eternal Authority, Admiral Velln heard the message. He stared at his sensor screens. His tactical officer was still counting contacts. The number had passed 400. Velln had 12 ships. He opened his mouth to give an order. Then he closed it. Then he looked at the sensor screen again. The intelligence file on humanity was still, technically, 4 lines long. It was about to get much longer. "All ships," Veln said finally, his voice very quiet. Battle stations. The first shot was not fired by the Dominion. This surprised Admiral Veln considerably. In every enforcement action he had ever commanded, the enemy waited. They watched the Dominion fleet power up its weapons. They watched the targeting systems lock on, and most of them, at that point, either surrendered or attacked out of terror, a wild, uncoordinated charge that was easy to handle. The humans did not wait. Before Veln had finished issuing his battle stations order, before his ships had fully powered their forward guns, before anyone on the Dominion side had made a single aggressive move, the human fleet moved. Not in a charge, in a pattern. "Admiral!" his tactical officer barked. "Multiple human vessels moving to flanking positions. They are spreading wide, very wide. I am reading drive signatures unlike anything in our..." The first human ship crossed the range threshold and fired. It did not fire at a Dominion warship. It fired at empty space, 2 kilometers to the left of Veln's flagship. The beam that hit that patch of empty space was a color Veln's species did not have a name for. It was not quite blue and not quite white, and it arrived with a sound that his hull transmitted as a deep harmonic vibration, like the whole ship had been struck by a very large, very gentle hammer. The space where the beam hit seemed to fold inward briefly, and then snap back. "What was that?" Veln demanded. "Unknown weapon type, Admiral. No matching signature in the database. The beam appears to have disrupted local space geometry. Our navigation computer is recalculating. It says we have moved." "Moved?" Veln stared at his screen. "Moved where?" "Approximately 14 kilometers from our previous position, without activating our drive." Veln looked at the tactical display. His fleet was still intact. Nothing had been destroyed. But his formation, the careful, practiced enforcement formation that his captains had drilled for 100 hours, was now a disorganized scatter of ships, each one displaced by varying amounts in varying directions. The formation that had arrived looking like a clenched fist now looked like someone had sneezed on a handful of marbles. "They didn't fire at us," his first officer said slowly, understanding dawning in his voice. "They fired at our formation. They broke us apart without destroying a single ship." "Why would they do that?" someone at the back of the bridge asked. Nobody answered, because nobody knew. Down on the planet, in the Geneva building, General Chen watched the formation disruption play out on her screens. Around her, the Defense Committee was very quiet. Most of them had been awake for more than 30 hours. Several had not believed the disruption weapon would work outside of test conditions. Now they were watching it work. "Phase 1 complete," her tactical coordinator reported. "Dominion fleet is disorganized. No ships destroyed. Recommend moving to Phase 2. "Hold Phase 2, Chen said. "Give them a minute." The room looked at her. "We said we didn't want a war," she reminded them. "We said we'd defend ourselves. We didn't say we wanted to kill 12 ships, full of beings who were probably just following orders. Give them 60 seconds to think about what just happened." The 60 seconds were the longest in the room's history. On the Eternal Authority, Admiral Veln was having a very different kind of minute. He was looking at his sensor data. He was looking at his scattered fleet. He was looking at the human ships, which had stopped moving after that one coordinated strike, and were now simply holding position. They were waiting. "Why are they waiting?" his tactical officer asked. "I think," Veln said slowly, "they are giving us a chance." He had fought many battles. He had never been given a chance in the middle of one. The concept was foreign to Dominion military doctrine. You pressed your advantage. You did not pause to be polite. He found, to his deep discomfort, that he respected it. He did not, however, intend to retreat. He had 12 warships. The Dominion's honor was at stake. He had orders. He had a career. He had 300 crew members who were looking to him for direction. "Reform the fleet," he said. "Alpha pattern. We push forward." It was the wrong call. He knew it was the wrong call even as he gave it. But he did not know what the right call was, and in the absence of a right answer, trained officers fell back on training. The Dominion fleet began to regroup. The human fleet reacted instantly. What happened next lasted 11 minutes and 43 seconds by the human measurement of time. Later, when analysts on both sides tried to reconstruct it, they used phrases like, unprecedented coordination, and doctrine we have no framework to counter. And, in one memorable Dominion internal report, this should not have been possible. The humans did not fight the way any species in the Dominion's files fought. They did not mass their firepower on single targets. They did not try to destroy the enemy fleet ship by ship. They did something that took Velm several minutes to understand, because it was so deeply strange. They fought the fleet as though it were a single organism with 12 parts, and they tried to confuse that organism rather than kill it. Human ships moved in tight pairs, each pair targeting a different Dominion warship, but not to destroy it. To blind it, they fired at sensor arrays, at communication dishes, at engine nacelles with careful, precise shots that reduced thrust without causing hull breaches. They jammed frequencies. They projected false signals. They used the disruption weapon again, not on formations but on individual ships, nudging them out of position every time a Dominion captain tried to lock into a stable firing solution. The Dominion fleet was like a large, powerful fighter who had been spun in circles until dizzy. The power was still there. The weapons still worked. But every time a Dominion ship lined up a shot, something had moved. Something was jamming the sensors. The targeting computer was arguing with the navigation computer, and there was another human ship coming in from a direction that didn't seem physically possible given where it had been 3 seconds ago. 3 Dominion ships tried to go to maximum power and punch through the center. The humans let them. They opened a path. And then, when the 3 ships were through the line and surrounded, the humans closed in from all sides with weapons fire, designed not to pierce the heavy frontal armor, which was where all 3 ships had their best protection, but to methodically take apart their engine systems from the rear and sides. All 3 ships went dead in space within 90 seconds, crews intact, hulls intact, completely helpless. "Admiral," Velm's first officer said, his voice very controlled, "I am receiving distress signals from the Fortitude, the Sovereign Will, and the Crushing Tide. Their drives are offline. They are requesting assistance." Velm was staring at the tactical display. 5 of his 12 ships were now either dead in space or so badly degraded they could barely maneuver. None of them had been destroyed. All of them had living crews. The humans were not trying to kill his people. "Why?" he said aloud, not really expecting an answer. His science officer, a quiet being who rarely spoke during combat, said, "Admiral, I believe they are trying to capture our ships, or at minimum, to demonstrate that they can defeat us without killing us. The precision required to consistently disable drives without causing hull breaches or crew casualties it is not easy. They are doing it deliberately." Velm thought about that. "Open a channel to the human commander," he said. It took 30 seconds. The face that appeared on his screen was the same woman who had spoken before, General Chen. She looked tired and calm, and more than a little sad. "Admiral," she said. "You are not trying to destroy my fleet," Velm said. It came out as an accusation. "No," she agreed. "Why not?" She looked at him for a moment. "Because you haven't destroyed ours," she said. "Because some of your crew are probably very young and very scared and just following orders. Because we don't want to be the kind of species that kills people it doesn't have to kill. And because," she glanced at something off-screen, "we'd rather you went home and told your Dominion exactly what happened here." Velm stared at her. "You want to send a message?" "We want to send a very loud message," she agreed. "But we don't want to send it in bodies." There was a long pause. "You knew," Velm said, "when our contact vessel arrived. You already knew about us." "We've been watching your expansion for about 15 years, Chen said. "We had some time to think." 15 years. Velm's intelligence file had been 4 lines long. The humans had 15 years of observation and planning. He thought about the infrastructure his scans had found, the mining operations, the relay stations, the ships that had been quietly, practically built, while humanity looked at the stars and thought hard about what might be looking back. "What are your terms?" he asked. "Terms? You have won this engagement. What do you want?" General Chen looked slightly surprised, as if she hadn't expected the question so quickly. She conferred briefly with someone off-screen, then looked back at him. "We want you to leave," she said. "We want you to take your ships, all of them, including the 3 we've disabled. We'll help you get them moving again. And we want you to go back to your dominion and tell them exactly what you found here. Tell them about what you saw. Tell them about what we can do. And tell them," her voice became very calm and very clear, "that we are open to negotiation. We are not open to submission. There is a difference." Veln looked at his tactical display. 7 functional ships. 5 disabled but recoverable. The humans were already moving support vessels toward his dead ships, apparently prepared to make good on their offer of assistance. He had never had an enemy offer to help repair his ships. "You realize," he said, "that when I return, the Dominion will send a larger fleet." "We know," Chen said. "A much larger fleet. We know that too. And you are not afraid." She looked at him with an expression he could not fully read across the distance of species and culture. "We're terrified," she said honestly. "But fear is not the same as surrender. We'll be ready." Veln closed the channel. He sat in his command chair for a long moment, feeling the weight of the battle that had just happened, the battle he had lost without losing a single life, and he thought about the report he was going to have to write when he got home. The intelligence file on humanity had been 4 lines long. He was going to need considerably more paper. "All ships," he said quietly, "prepare for departure. We accept the humans' offer of assistance for our damaged vessels. Treat their repair crews with respect." His bridge crew was silent for a moment. Then his first officer spoke. "Admiral, what do we tell the Dominion?" Veln looked at the blue planet on his screen. Small, watery, home to soft-bodied bipeds with short lifespans and no natural weapons. "Tell them," he said, "that we have encountered something we have not encountered before. Tell them the truth." "And what is the truth, Admiral?" Veln watched a human support ship pull alongside one of his crippled warships with gentle, practiced precision. He watched human crew in environment suits exit airlocks and begin the work of repair without being asked, without ceremony, with a kind of cheerful competence that was somehow more unsettling than any weapon. "The truth," he said, "is that we made a mistake. We assumed the file was complete. We assumed that because we had not noticed them, they had not noticed us." He paused. "The humans noticed us. They have been noticing us for 15 years, and everything they did while we were not looking was pointed, in one way or another, at the day we showed up." He turned away from the screen. "The Dominion," he said quietly, "is going to need a better file." The Dominion Council of Voices met in emergency session 2 weeks after Admiral Veln returned home. They met in the Grand Chamber on the Dominion's capital world, a vast room with walls of polished black stone and a ceiling so high that the upper reaches were lost in artificial shadow. The Council of Voices had 112 members, representing every major species within the Dominion. They had been governing an empire of 43 star systems for 300 years. They had crushed revolts. They had absorbed uprisings. They had broken warrior races and philosopher races, and races that communicated entirely through smell. They had never had to hold an emergency session over a pre-contact species before. Veln stood at the speaker's podium and gave his report. He was thorough. He was precise. He showed the tactical recordings, the sensor data, the communication logs. He played the recording of General Chen's voice saying, clearly and calmly, that humanity was not open to submission. He did not editorialize. He did not add his personal opinions. He presented the facts. The room was very quiet when he finished. High-voice Merrick, the most senior member of the council, spoke first. Merrick was very old and very slow, but nobody in the room mistook slow for stupid. "You are telling us," Merrick said, "that 12 Dominion warships were defeated by a pre-contact species, without losses on the human side, without meaningful damage to their fleet." "That is correct, High Voice. And you accepted their assistance in repairing your disabled ships." "Also correct. Their technical crews were highly competent. The repairs were completed faster than our own engineers could have managed." A ripple of discomfort went through the chamber. "Admiral Veln," said Voicecrath of the Military Council, a hard-edged being who had never in his career used a word like nuance, "why did you not fight to the last ship?" "That is doctrine. That is the code." Veln looked at him steadily. "Because the humans offered a way out that did not require my crew to die, and because I believed, I still believe, that killing those crews would have served no strategic purpose. We did not understand what we were fighting. We still do not fully understand it. Fighting to the last ship against a poorly understood enemy, in service of a pride that accomplishes nothing, is not valor, it is waste. Krath looked like he had bitten into something sour. He said nothing more. High-voice Merrick leaned forward. The weapon they used, the one that moves ships without engaging their drives. You have no record of this technology? None. Our science division has been analyzing the sensor recordings since our return. They have theories. They are not confident theories. And the precision with which they disabled our ships without causing hull breaches. Extraordinary. Our tactical analysis suggests that level of precision would require targeting systems significantly more advanced than what we use. But the ships that deployed those systems were, by other measures, not as advanced as Dominion warships. The technology distribution is uneven. Explain. Velm gathered his thoughts. The humans appear to have developed certain technologies to very high levels while remaining at lower levels in others. Their hull materials and basic propulsion are roughly equivalent to our older warship classes, but their sensors, targeting, some of their energy systems, and whatever produces the displacement weapon, these are beyond our current capabilities. It is as though they looked at the problems they expected to face and solved those problems specifically, without necessarily filling in the gaps between them. Merrick was quiet for a moment. That sounds like a species that knew what it needed to prepare for. Yes, High Voice. That is my assessment as well. The chamber descended into conversation. 112 voices, representing 112 different perspectives, all processing the same information and arriving at very different conclusions. Some wanted to send a war fleet, a real war fleet, not 12 ships but 100, or 300, enough firepower to crack the planet itself if necessary. The Dominion had not built an empire by backing down from primitive species. Some wanted to wait, study the recordings more, build a better intelligence file. The fact that the original file had been 4 lines long was raised, to general embarrassment, by 3 different speakers, and then act from a position of knowledge. A small number, mostly the older voices, the ones who had been on the council long enough to remember when the Dominion was still expanding and making its early mistakes, wanted something quite different. Negotiate, said Voice Pella of the Science Assembly, the oldest person in the room. She said it so simply that it took a moment for the word to register. Negotiate, repeated Krath, as though the word had a bad taste. With a pre-contact species? With a species that just defeated 12 of our warships without taking a casualty, Pella said calmly. We can argue about what we call them. The behavior speaks for itself. She turned to address the full chamber. I have been on this council for 60 years. I have seen the Dominion make this mistake before. We assume that species we have not catalogued are therefore simple. We assume that because we did not notice them, they are not worth noticing. We write a 4-line file, and we send an enforcement fleet, and we are surprised when things do not go according to plan. She let that sit for a moment. The humans told Admiral Velm they have been watching us for 15 years. 15 years. They watched us expand. They watched us contact and absorb other species. They took notes, and then they built, quietly and practically, exactly what they needed to address the specific challenge of a Dominion enforcement fleet. She paused. If we send 100 ships, they will have taken notes on 12. They will be preparing for 100. If we send 300, they will prepare for 300. Then we send 1,000, Krath said, and they prepare for 1,000, while we have tied up resources, while the species we are actually responsible for governing wonder why we are pouring ships into a war with a single star system that just wants to be left alone. Pella shook her head. This is not a species we can simply overwhelm. They think, they plan. They have been doing this longer and more carefully than we gave them credit for. We need to adjust our understanding of them, not just our fleet numbers. The argument went on for 6 hours. In the end, the council made a decision that satisfied almost nobody, which is often the mark of the most practical kind of decision. They would send an ambassador, a real one, with real authority to negotiate, not just a contact vessel with a submission form. They would also, quietly, begin assembling a larger military force, because Krath was not entirely wrong. and because the Dominion could not simply ignore a potential threat on its expansion route. But the fleet would not move until diplomacy had been tried in earnest. High-voice Merrick, announcing the decision, looked tired in a way that went beyond his very considerable age. "We have been surprised," he said simply. "We do not like being surprised. We will not be surprised again." The ambassador they chose was Voice Pela herself. She accepted the assignment without hesitation, which was how everyone knew she had expected it. Back on the blue planet, the United Earth Council was having its own arguments. They had won the first engagement, that much was clear. But General Chen, in her report to the Council, was very careful about the word won. She used it only once, and immediately qualified it. "We demonstrated capability," she said. "We sent a message. The message was, we are not what you assumed. We can fight. We prefer not to." She paused. "The Dominion will respond. We don't know how. They might send diplomats. They might send 100 ships. They might send both at the same time." "What do we do if they send 100 ships?" asked a council member from the Eastern Bloc, a man whose country had been in difficult places before and had very clear ideas about what to do next. "We fight," Chen said, "with everything we have, and we probably take losses this time. 12 ships we could handle with room to spare. 100 ships would be a real battle. We'd win." She said it with certainty, not bravado, but it would cost us. "How certain are you that we'd win?" Chen looked at the question for a long time. Certain enough to have said what we said to their admiral, not certain enough to be comfortable. That was the most honest thing said in the room all day, and everyone knew it. They began their preparations. More ships, the ones that had been held in reserve, were moved into active deployment. The disruption weapon, which had worked beyond anyone's expectation, was put into mass production, or as close to mass production as something that had been a prototype 18 months ago could get. A second facility on the Red Planet was expanded. The asteroid mining operations were pushed to maximum output. They also prepared a negotiating team. Because Chen had said the Dominion might send diplomats, and because she had believed this from the beginning, that diplomacy was the actual goal, not war. Not submission, not conquest. Just the right to exist as they were, to make their own choices, to go their own direction in the galaxy, without having to ask permission. She had put it to the Council on the day the contact ship first arrived, and she said it again now. "We're not trying to beat them. We're trying to make them understand that beating us would cost more than leaving us alone." "And if they don't understand that?" someone asked. "Then we keep demonstrating it," she said, "until they do." The Dominion ambassador's ship arrived 3 weeks later. It came alone. No escort, no warships hanging at the edge of the system. Just one ship, broadcasting peaceful intent codes on every frequency, moving slowly and openly toward Earth. Chen watched it on the long-range sensors and felt something she had not expected to feel: relief. "They're talking," she said. "Whatever happens next, they're talking." She thought about the road that had led here. 15 years of watching, building, planning. 15 years of people who were called paranoid and expensive and alarmist, who had looked at the expansion patterns in the distant stars and said, "This is coming. We need to be ready." They had been ready. Not because they wanted a fight, because they wanted very badly not to have to fight on someone else's terms. "Prepare a reception," she told her team. "Formal. Full diplomatic protocol. Translate every document we have into every language we know they use." She paused. "Make sure the food is good, whatever they eat." "We don't know what they eat," her aide pointed out. "Then find out," she said. "We have 3 weeks and a very fast ship. Figure it out." The Dominion ambassador's vessel settled into orbit above the blue planet, and for the first time in the history of this small, watery world, something truly significant happened. 2 civilizations who had just tried, carefully and with great mutual respect, to avoid killing each other, sat down at a table to decide what came next. It was not yet peace. It was not yet war. It was something rarer and more fragile than either. It was the beginning of a conversation. And on a planet that had spent its entire history talking its way through impossible situations, that was, perhaps, the best possible start. Voice Pela had been on the Council of Voices for 60 years, which meant she had negotiated with species that communicated through color changes, species that considered silence a form of aggression, and one memorable species that expressed every emotional state by adjusting the temperature of their immediate environment. She thought she had encountered every possible kind of difficult negotiating partner. She had not negotiated with humans before. The first session lasted 9 hours. Pela had expected this. What she had not expected was that approximately 7 of those 9 hours would be spent on a single question that the humans kept returning to from different directions, like a river finding its way around a large rock. The question was, what did the Dominion actually want? Not what did the Dominion claim to want. Not what did the Dominion's treaty documents say it wanted. What did it actually, genuinely, in practice want from the human star system? The first time they asked, Pela gave the standard answer: integration into the Dominion trade network, a contribution to the Shared Defense Fund, recognition of Dominion authority over interspecies disputes, and nominal sovereignty for human internal affairs under the Council's oversight. The human chief negotiator, a man named Director Osei, who had apparently spent 30 years as a trade mediator before moving to diplomatic work, listened to this answer with great patience and then asked, "And what does that cost us?" Pela gave the standard answer for that too. A percentage of economic output, a cap on military development, participation in council sessions as a non-voting observer until full membership was granted. Director Osei wrote everything down very carefully. Then he looked up and said, "And what do we get?" Pela opened her mouth and closed it again. The question was, well, it wasn't not asked. Species asked it sometimes, but usually they asked it while looking frightened, as if they expected the answer to be nothing, and they were pleasantly surprised by whatever minor benefit the Dominion offered. Director Osei asked it as if he expected a real answer and would be checking it against an internal accounting. "You get," Pela said carefully, "the protection of the Dominion fleet." From whom? From hostile outside forces, such as. Pela thought about the hostile outside forces. The Dominion had been the dominant power in this region of the galaxy for 3 centuries. There were some smaller independent states on its borders, a few scattered independent species that hadn't been absorbed yet, and the vast unexplored regions beyond its current expansion. None of these were currently threatening the human system. "The protection is a general guarantee," she said, "against future threats. So currently we have no threats other than the Dominion itself." It was said without any heat, with just the same careful, patient tone that Director Osei used for everything. Pela found it somewhat exhausting. "We are not a threat," she said. "You arrived with 12 warships and a submission document. That was a standard contact." "We understand. It was standard," Osei said. "We're not angry about it. We're just accounting for it." He made a small note. "The protection you offer is protection primarily against you. The trade network is a network controlled by you. The cap on military development means we remain permanently weaker than you. The observer status at council sessions means we listen but don't vote." He looked up. "From our side of the table, Ambassador, this looks like a very nice description of the word conquered." Pela was quiet for a moment. "We prefer the word integrated," she said. "We know," Osei said pleasantly. "We'd like to talk about what an arrangement might look like where the word integrated and the word conquered are further apart from each other." The next 7 hours went on like this. By the end of the session, Pela had sent 3 messages back to the Dominion Council, asking for clarification on things she had always assumed were non-negotiable. By the second session, she had sent 12 more. By the third session, she had stopped checking the messages and started just negotiating, because she had realized something that took all her 60 years of experience to fully appreciate. The humans were not trying to get the best deal. They were trying to build a framework. There was a difference. When most species negotiated with the Dominion, they were trying to minimize their losses. They wanted the lightest possible terms, the least restrictive cap on military development, the most observer rights they could squeeze out of the council. They negotiated for their position. The humans were negotiating for a relationship. Every question Director Osei asked, every clarification he requested, every standard Dominion clause that he politely but firmly rejected, was aimed not at making humanity's current situation better, but at building something that would still be functional and fair in 50 years, 100 years, 200 years. You're thinking very far ahead, Pella said on the third day. We think about the long run, Osei agreed. Short lifespans make you focus on legacy. He smiled. We won't be here to see how this ends. Our children will. We try to set it up well. Pella looked at him. She was, by the standards of her species, not particularly old. She would live another 300 years or more. To her, 80 years, the span of a human life, was a brief season. She had colleagues on the council who had been serving for longer than human civilization had been building cities. And yet this short-lived species, this people who measured their history in millennia rather than hundreds of millennia, were negotiating with more patience and more long-term thinking than she had seen from species who would be alive to see the results. Why? She asked. He looked at her with what she had come to recognize as curiosity, not offense. Why what? Why do you think so far ahead when you will not be there? Osei thought about this for a moment. Because the people who come after us are still us, he said finally. They are our children and their children and the children beyond that. We don't stop caring about them just because we won't know their faces. He shrugged. We've had some bad experiences with short-term thinking. We learned. Pella sent that exchange, word for word, to the Dominion Council in her next report. She flagged it with a priority mark she had used only twice in her career. The negotiations took 42 days. At the end of them, the agreement that sat on the table was not the agreement the Dominion had ever signed with any species before. It was not a submission document with generous terms. It was not an integration treaty. It was something the Dominion's legal team spent 3 days just trying to categorize, because they didn't have a file for it. The humans called it a non-subordination compact. Under its terms, humanity would participate in the Dominion trade network on equal commercial terms, without preferential rates or mandatory levies. Humanity would contribute to shared defense discussions, and could request Dominion assistance in emergencies, but retained full military independence, and no cap on development. Humanity would have a voting seat at the Council within 10 years, not observer status, a full voting seat. All expansion by either party into new star systems would require joint notification. Neither party could claim sovereignty over the other's citizens in their home systems. In exchange, humanity agreed to share certain technologies, not all of them, and not the most sensitive ones, but enough. The sensor systems, some of the targeting advances, 3 manufacturing processes that had taken humanity 2 decades to develop. They also agreed to a mutual defense clause. If the Dominion was attacked by an outside party, humanity would be asked to participate. They were not obligated to comply, but they could be asked. The Dominion's military council hated the agreement. Krath sent 3 formal objections and 1 informal message to Pella that she did not dignify with a response. High-voice Merak read it twice, and then asked for a private meeting with Pella. This is not what we sent you to negotiate, he said. No, she agreed. It is better. Better for whom? Better for the Dominion, she said. High voice. We have 43 systems. We have 300 years of history, and a well-documented record of how we handle species we encounter. The humans have 1 system, a population of several billion, and 15 years of notes on us. She leaned forward. The technologies in that agreement, the targeting systems alone, will take our military capability up by 30% within a decade. The manufacturing processes will reduce our shipbuilding costs by a 1/5. And we have a species on our expansion route that is not hostile, not sulking under a submission it resents, and not quietly building the capability to stab us when we're not looking. Merak was quiet. We have tried the submission model 3 dozen times, Pella said. Most of those species are compliant. Some of them are secretly miserable. A few of them are building things we haven't noticed yet, because we're not very good at noticing things we haven't been looking for. She paused. The humans noticed things we didn't know they were looking for. And then they built exactly what they needed. I would rather have that capacity pointed away from us. Merak looked at the agreement for a long time. If the Council approves this, he said slowly, it sets a precedent. Yes, Pella agreed. It does. Other species will use it as a model. Some of them, she said, the ones capable of negotiating from a position of genuine capability. which frankly is not many. This agreement works because the humans had the ability to make our alternative expensive. Most species we contact cannot do that. And future species? Pela thought about the vast, unexplored regions beyond the Dominion's current borders. She thought about how many files were 4 lines long. She thought about how many species had 15 years of notes on the Dominion that the Dominion had never known about. Future species, she said carefully, might benefit from the Dominion having a better approach ready. The Council voted on the agreement 12 days later. It passed by a margin that was not comfortable and not enormous. 42 voices in favor, 39 against, 31 abstentions from members who were not yet sure what they thought. Pela sent the result to Director Ose by secure channel. His response came back within the hour, a single line of text in the formal diplomatic register that translated roughly as, "We look forward to the work ahead." Attached was a second message, clearly personal rather than official, in a more casual form. It took her translation software longer to parse because of the idiom density. It said, "Also, we're sending you some of that tea. You should really try it." Pela stared at the message for a long time. Then, slowly, she found herself doing something she had not done in a very long time. She laughed. Not at the humans, not at the situation, just at the strange, improbable, genuinely wonderful fact that this was how the story had gone. 12 warships and a 4-line file, and somehow they had ended up here, at the edge of something new. She would try the tea. She suspected she would like it. 10 years passed. In the long sweep of galactic history, 10 years was nothing. It was barely a breath. The Dominion had existed for 3 centuries. Some of its member species measured their civilization in tens of thousands of years. 10 years was the kind of time that appeared in records as a footnote, the kind of time that got summarized in a single sentence in a history document. In the human star system, 10 years was enough to change almost everything. The non-subordination compact had been in effect for 9 years and 8 months, when the Dominion Council of Voices convened its regular annual session. The session had an unusually long agenda. 17 items, ranging from trade disputes in the outer systems to a new species contact in the Calyx Nebula region, the expansion push that had originally sent Admiral Veln toward Earth. Item 14 on the agenda was the Human Integration Progress Report. The name was a small irony that Voice Pela, now retired from active council duties but still an advisor, noted privately to herself. The word integration had been one of the things Director Ose had politely picked apart at the negotiating table a decade ago. It had survived in the report name as a kind of institutional muscle memory. The representative who stood to present the report was human. Her name was Counselor Adaeze Ibori, and she had spent the past 3 years as the first official human voice in the Dominion Council. Not an observer, a voice, with a vote. She was 61 years old, which meant she would live another 20 or 30 years at most. She was one of the oldest people in the room. She was also, by consensus of virtually every species represented, one of the most effective. The report she presented was thorough, as human reports always were. In 10 years, the technology-sharing provisions of the Compact had changed Dominion manufacturing practices more significantly than any development in the previous 50 years. The targeting systems alone had improved naval precision across the fleet by 38%, slightly higher than Pela's original projection. 3 new propulsion refinements, adapted from human deep space exploration work, had reduced transit times on the outer expansion routes by nearly a quarter. A medical exchange program had produced 2 treatments for conditions that had been considered permanent in Dominion biology. In return, humanity had access to the Dominion trade network. Their resource extraction operations in the outer system ran at a scale that would not have been possible without Dominion commercial infrastructure. 3 human companies were now among the largest independent trading entities in the network. The Mutual Defense Clause had been invoked once, when a militant faction from a non-Dominion species had raided a resource station in the outer reaches. Human ships had responded alongside Dominion vessels. The engagement had lasted 4 hours. The militant faction had not raided anything since. Item 14 is noted. High Voice Merak said. Still high voice. Still slow. Still not slow in any way that mattered. When Counselor Ibori concluded her report. Are there questions? There were, as always, questions. Most of them were procedural. Some were about specific trade figures. One was a slightly pointed inquiry from Voice Krath about the pace of human military development, which Ibori answered by pulling up the mutual disclosure figures both parties had agreed to file, and pointing out, very calmly, that the Dominion's fleet expansion over the same period had been proportionally larger. Krath had nothing to say to that. He rarely did, these days. After the session, Pela found Ibori in one of the small meeting rooms off the main chamber. The human was standing at the window, looking out at the capital city spreading below. It was a beautiful city, dark stone and amber light, very old in the way that things built to last become old. "How are you finding it?" Pela asked. Ibori turned from the window. She had the kind of face that showed what it was thinking, which Pela had noticed was common among humans, even when they were trying to be diplomatic. "Honestly, it's strange. I sit in that chamber and I'm the youngest thing in the room by several centuries, and I'm supposed to represent a species that most of them had never heard of 12 years ago. And yet," Pela said, "and yet," Ibori smiled slightly, "we're here. Does it feel like what you hoped for?" Ibori considered the question seriously, in the way Pela had come to expect from humans when they were asked something worth thinking about. Better in some ways, harder in some ways. I read the original negotiation transcripts before I took this posting. Director Osei's team, they were brilliant. They built something that works. She paused. What they couldn't build was the human part, making sure we actually show up, make the arguments, do the work. That's on us, every day. Pela looked at her for a moment. "Can I tell you something I have never put in a report?" Ibori raised an eyebrow. Among humans, this was an expression of interest and attention. "When we sent the contact vessel to your system," Pela said, "there was a faction on the council, not a large one, but it existed, that argued we should not even follow the standard protocol, that we should simply move your star system to the restricted transit file and go around you. Avoid contact entirely. You were not on the main expansion route anyway, not essentially. We could have routed around you and never made contact at all." Ibori stared at her. "I didn't know that." "It was a minority position. It lost. Krath argued against it, actually, on the grounds that ignoring a known inhabited system was operationally sloppy." Pela's expression was dry. "So in a strange way, we owe Krath a debt." "What would have happened," Ibori said slowly, "if you'd gone around us?" "You would have kept building," Pela said. "Your infrastructure, your ships, your technologies, and at some point, 10 years from then, 20, 50, you would have expanded beyond your system and encountered us from the other direction, with however many more years of preparation you had accumulated." She paused. "I think the outcome of that encounter would have been different." "Different how?" "Less room for conversation," Pela said simply. Ibori was quiet for a moment. "So the 4-line file might have actually saved us both." "The 4-line file, and the fact that you had people paying attention, people who looked at the stars and said, 'Something is coming. Let's be ready.'" Pela moved to stand beside her at the window. "We have updated our contact protocols, you know. The new standard for first contact surveys is a minimum of 4 comprehensive passes over 12 years, with full spectrum analysis and a linguistic attempt before any contact vessel is dispatched. It is in the new manual, Chapter 7. What do they call it?" Pela glanced at her. "Informally, the staff calls it the Human Protocol." Ibori made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was close to one. Down in the Dominion's military archives, the original intelligence file on humanity still existed. It had been preserved, in the way that significant historical documents are preserved, as a record of how things had been. Researchers occasionally cited it in papers on first contact methodology. It was used in training materials as an example of insufficient analysis. It still said, in its original form, exactly 4 lines. Someone had added a 5th line, in Admiral Veln's notation style, that said, "Caution advised, unknown behavioral patterns." And below that, in a different hand, someone, no one had ever successfully determined who, had added a 6th line. It said, "They know we're here." Veln himself had retired from active command after the Earth engagement. Not in disgrace. The inquiry into the battle had concluded that he had acted with sound judgment given the intelligence available, and that the intelligence available had been the real failure. But he had stepped back from fleet command and moved to a teaching position at the Dominion Naval Academy, where he taught a course on first contact operations. The first day of every class, he put the 4-line file on the display screen. He let his students read it. He gave them time to think they understood it. Then he showed them the tactical recording of the battle, the full recording, from the moment his fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel to the moment the first human support ship arrived to help repair his crippled vessels. He let them watch in silence. After the recording ended, he asked a single question. What did we get wrong? The first answer was always the intelligence file. Obviously, the file was inadequate. He would nod and write it on the board and wait. The second answer was usually the survey methodology, the single drone pass, 6 years old, that had produced such thin data, also correct. He wrote it down and waited. Eventually, sometimes in the first class, sometimes in the third, a student would say something different. They would say, "We assumed," and Veln would put down his marker and give that student his full attention. "Expand on that," he would say. "We assumed," the student would say, working it out as they spoke, "that because we had not noticed them, they had not noticed us. We assumed that our absence of information was information about them. We assumed the file was complete because we had written it." "Yes," Veln would say, "that is the real mistake. The file is never complete. The absence of a record is not evidence of absence. Somewhere, always, something is watching. Something is building. Something has been paying attention to your expansion patterns for 15 years and thinking very hard about what to do when you show up." He would pause. "Your job is to understand that before you arrive, not after." It was a good lesson. His students remembered it. He hoped, privately, that the Dominion was remembering it too. Back on the blue planet, in the Geneva building that had seen so many long nights and difficult decisions, the United Earth Council's Defense Committee had its own records to review. They reviewed them every year, the original threat assessment, the 15 years of observation data, the plans that had been drawn up and revised and drawn up again, the list of technologies that had been prioritized, and the list of technologies that had been deliberately not prioritized because they were too aggressive, too likely to be misread as offensive rather than defensive. General Chen, retired now but still occasionally consulted, would sit in on these reviews when she was asked. She was older, she moved more slowly. She still had the same calm voice that had not wavered through 14 consecutive hours of emergency session. At the end of the most recent review, a young defense analyst had asked her a question that she thought about for several days afterward. The analyst had looked at the original plan, the 15 years of preparation, the carefully targeted technology development, the decision to fight defensive rather than offensive, and said, "Was it luck that it worked out the way it did?" Chen had thought about that. "Some," she said. "We got lucky that the first admiral they sent was Veln, and that Veln was the kind of person who could hear what we were saying. We got lucky that Voice Pella was the kind of diplomat who could adapt. We got lucky in a dozen small ways." She paused. "But luck doesn't build the infrastructure. Luck doesn't do 15 years of work. Luck doesn't put the right people in the right rooms and give them the authority to make hard decisions early." She looked at the young analyst. "We made our own luck," she said. "Mostly. The rest we earned." The analyst wrote that down. Outside the windows of the Geneva building, the city went on in the way cities do. People walked to work and came home and cooked dinner, and argued about small things and loved each other, and worried about the future the way humans always had, and probably always would. Above them, the sky was the same blue it had always been. The stars, when night came, were the same stars. But they were different now too, in the way that things change meaning when you understand them better. Those stars were no longer just lights or mysteries or destinations. They were neighbors. Some of those neighbors had wanted to own humanity, and humanity had said no, clearly and expensively, and then sat down and built something better. It was not perfect. The compact was not perfect. The Dominion was not perfect. Humanity was very much not perfect. But they were here, on their own terms, at their own table, with a vote. In a universe full of species who had not been given a chance to choose, that was worth more than any four-line file could ever have predicted. The intelligence record on humanity, updated now to several thousand pages and still growing, had a new first entry at the top. It had been added by Counselor Ibori herself, as a small joke that had somehow become official. It read, "Do not underestimate." 2 words. More useful than 4 lines. The stars turned, the ships moved between them, and on the third planet of a yellow sun, the people who had looked up and paid attention kept doing what they had always done. They planned, they built, they argued, they adapted, and they kept watch. They were ready. They were always ready. That was the thing about humans that no 4-line file could capture, and no fleet of 12 warships could change. They had been paying attention long before anyone thought to look.